All right, let's get started here on the Panther-Lair podcast, Tuesday night edition, Wednesday morning podcast, Tuesday night live stream. You know the deal. You know how we do it every week. We get together on Tuesday nights and talk a little bit about Pitt sports. We have the live stream on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And unique thing about that is that you can get into the comments section, you can interact, you can ask questions, you can post comments, and we can have a conversation, really, or at least as close as you can get to conversations nowadays as these things go. It's a little bit of talk back, a little bit of interaction, a little bit of discussion. So if you're in the YouTube, if you're on the YouTube live stream, check that out and keep, interact. Have any thoughts or questions or comments. And then, of course, we release the podcast on Wednesday mornings. You can listen to that throughout the week. Hopefully it still functions as an interesting podcast for you. If you liked it before, I hope you still like it, even though we've gone to the YouTube live streaming concept. And then later in the week, of course, we have our Friday guest conversation podcast. We have another good one this week. Hopefully you caught last week with Scott McKillop. I thought that was a great conversation. If you missed that, Scott's a great interview. He's a smart guy. He knows football. He played an important part. He was one of the best defensive players in Pitt history. So I'd say he's a pretty key former Panther. And it was just a great conversation. I had a lot of fun talking to him. And hopefully if you checked it out, you enjoyed that conversation as well. And then before that, we had Jeff Capel. We had Lateef Grimm. We had Pat Bostic. We got another good one coming up this week. The Friday morning release of the podcast. You definitely want to keep an eye out for that one, because if you're a Pitt fan, you like Pitt sports, you like Pitt football in particular, but also just Pitt sports in general, you're going to like hearing from the guy we talked to for this week's conversation podcast. So hopefully you can check that out and hopefully you enjoy it. And then Saturday mornings, I like to run down the programming here. Saturday mornings, we have the Panthers Insider Show. We're back on 93.7 The Fan. Had a little hiatus. Ran the show really from August through 3-4 weeks ago. Then we took a little hiatus due to pandemic and whatnot, but we're back. Hiatus is over, and we went back to the airwaves on Saturday morning. Had a lot of good conversation, had a lot of fun doing it, and we'll be back again this Saturday. So 8 a.m. on 93.7 The Fan, the Panthers Insider Show. So lots of places you can get your Pitt content right now, and I always say that none of us knows what is gonna happen in the fall. I mean, my family and I are trying to figure out if we're going to take a vacation in June. A previously planned vacation in June. And I mean, if you're a Pitt fan, you should hope that I do take that vacation, because typically when I take a vacation, usually good things happen for Pitt. Usually a lot of commitments, and I end up having to work through vacation, much to my family's chagrin. But if you're a Pitt fan, you would certainly enjoy it because it's good news and it's recruiting news and that kind of thing. So, I mean, we're trying to plan that out, and we don't know if that's going to happen. We don't know if we're going to go on vacation in June, let alone what's going to happen in September and October and November and December. Nobody knows, but until we find out what's going to happen, we might as well keep talking about Pitt football and Pitt basketball and recruiting and graduate transfers and how the roster might fill itself out and what it might end up looking like once the season actually starts, if the season does start. So everything we do, everything we talk about has that shadow sort of looming over it, that cloud of like, are they really going to have a season? But until we have a definitive answer that they're not, I'm going to keep talking about this team as if it's going to play in the fall. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know if they're going to play, but we're going to keep talking about it as if they are going to play. So I was trying to think of some topics, some things we could talk about this week, and came up with a few things I think we can discuss. Certainly, if we get a chance to, we'll talk about ESPN. Their FPI ranking doesn't think very much of Pitt, and certainly doesn't think very much of Pitt's matchups against some of their opponents. Picked to lose a bunch of games. I think picked to go 6-6 by their percentages, and even some of the games they're picked to win are slightly over 50%, and it's questionable. But we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit. Want to talk a little bit about past recruiting and the makeup of certain position groups and that kind of thing, because I think that stuff is always interesting to look back on. But I want to start off with a pretty basic idea, pretty basic concept. Let's rank the position groups. Let's rank the position groups on Pitt's 2020 roster. Now, to some extent, I kind of gave away. I didn't bury it. What's the opposite of burying the lead? I gave it away last week when I talked about how I was sure that the defensive line was the strongest position on Pitt's team, right? I talked at length about that. I feel like that was the whole premise of last week's podcast, and I wrote about it in the 321 column. I think I talked about it on the Panthers Insider Show. I get an idea in my head in any given week, and you're going to hear about it in three places. You're going to hear about it on this Tuesday night podcast. You're going to read about it in the 321 column on Panther-Lair.com on Fridays, and then you're going to hear me talk about it again, hopefully in more refined fashion with more research throughout the course of the week on Saturday morning on the Panthers Insider Show on 93.7 The Fan. So I don't have enough ideas to support unique content across all of those platforms. Fortunately, I think there's enough different audiences for each of those platforms that it's not too much overkill, as it were. But I understand that some people do listen to the podcast, listen to the radio show, read the column. Hopefully I can say things at least in a slightly different fashion each time and not totally burn you out on it. But yeah, so I talked a lot last week about the defensive line being the strongest position on the team. So you probably know that if I'm going to rank the position groups for Pitt in 2020, I'm going to have to start with the defensive line. Now I was thinking we probably should break it down a little bit. And instead of just having offensive line, defensive backs, I think you got to split those up a little. I think there is a separation between defensive ends and defensive tackles. I think there's a separation between cornerbacks and safeties, obviously. And I think even on the offensive line, particularly as it relates to Pitt this year, there's a separation you can make between the tackles and then the interior linemen, the guards and the centers. And I think if you're going to rank position groups, I don't think you need to rank guards, centers, and tackles as three separate positions among the offensive linemen, but I think you can go tackles as one group, guards, centers, interior linemen as another group. Just like I think you can go defensive ends as one group and defensive tackles as another group. Now, taken as a whole, the defensive line is the biggest strength of the team, and the offensive line is the biggest weakness of the team. But I think when you break it down, it's not quite as uniform across those position groups. So you probably know what I'm going to say for the first, the number one spot on my rankings of the position groups on this 2020 football team, at least as they look sitting here, in April. Before I do that, though, I'm getting a little parched. Voodoo Brewery from Meadville. They, last week we had the non-trademark infringement alma mater IPA. This week we've got the Tranquil Breezes, which is a West Coast style American pale ale brewed with Azacca, Sultana, formerly Denali, and Trident. So we're going to have a little sip of this. That is a tasty beer. Voodoo, I got to give it to them. I never really thought much good came out of Meadville. These dudes got it going on. And ladies, I don't know what their client, I don't know who works there, if it's all men or if it's women or co-ed, whatever it is. But cheers to you guys, because Voodoo, you've made a delicious drink in this Tranquil Breezes. That is good. All right, let's talk position rankings. Number one, and you probably would not be surprised to see this, but as I say, I already said the defensive line is the strength of the team, talent and depth. It's as good as it gets. And I think when you look at number one on, if we're going to break the positions down, it's got to be defensive end. You like that on the YouTube? I got a little graphic up. The defensive ends, I think, is the strength of the team. And I think it's talent and it's depth. And whether you look at two returning starters in Patrick Jones and Deslin Alexandra, another returning starter in Rashad Weaver, who didn't play last year due to injury. You look at the production that those guys have in their history, and then you look at the reserves. That's three guys that I already named: Jones, Alexandra, and Weaver. And those three is better than the combinations that Pitt has had in the entire defensive end position group in a long, long time. Maybe going back to 2010, when, at least personnel-wise, you had Greg Romeus, Jabal Sheard, and Brandon Lindsay, but Romeus barely played that year due to an injury. So you didn't even have, and Lindsay was a young guy. Lindsay was probably a redshirt freshman in 2010. So he didn't have a ton of experience. He ended up having a great season, but he didn't have a ton of experience. This year, you've got Weaver, Jones, and Alexander, all with extensive full season starting experience, all with a history of production. That's just the starting group. Those guys. One of those guys is not going to be a starter in 2020. That's crazy. I don't know. I mean, I guess you bench Alexander. Patrick Jones is the only one I'm sure of. I guess you bench Alexander and put Rashad Weaver back into the starting lineup. But I mean, you're going to rotate a lot, and all three of those guys are going to play, as are Habakkuk Baldonado and John Morgan. And I think there's real breakout potential for those guys, for Baldonado and for Morgan. I think they didn't have breakout seasons last year, but I think they both did well in reserve roles. And then, I mean, you can even go further down the depth. So, I mean, that's 5 guys we're talking about. And I think the coaches would be comfortable with any of those 5. Any combination of those 5 on the field, they'll feel good about. And I think you'll see Baldonado and Morgan together as the 2 DNs on the field in important situations in the third quarter and the fourth quarter this season, just to keep rotating guys and keep them fresh. I think Charlie Partridge is comfortable with rolling both of those guys out there, as well as Morgan, or as well as Weaver, Alexander, and Jones. But then you get even deeper to the guys that we haven't seen yet. A guy like Bam Brima, who I hear a lot of good things about. I mean, you're going 3 deep, legitimately 3 deep, confidently 3 deep at the defensive end position. I don't think there's any question, from my perspective at least, that's the strongest position on the team. Talent-wise and depth-wise, I don't think it gets better if you look across this roster. The number 2 strongest position, and this is probably, I haven't checked into the YouTube comments here so far. We got a lot of questions. I haven't seen anybody jumping in with their own contributions yet. If you guys have a disagreement about what I've said so far, let me know what you think. But the number 2, I think, is not very far behind number 1. I think the biggest difference is the depth. I think number 1, defensive end, stands out as being the strongest position group on the team because of the talent, the experience, and the depth. Number 2 doesn't quite have the depth yet, but it could by the end of the season, depending on how they rotate. It's definitely got the top line talent, and maybe the best top line talent of any position on the team. And if it's not the best, it's a very close second, and that's why number 2 has to be safety. And I don't think there's any question. I mean, Paris Ford and Damar Hamlin is the best pair of safeties Pitt has had in I don't know how long. I mean, we've talked about this before, trying to figure out the last time Pitt had a pair of safeties like Hamlin and Ford. I can't think of a time. Can you? I can't think of another time. And I mean, we did this exercise with the defensive line and the defensive ends. And I can't think of any time where the safeties really compared to what Pitt has coming back in Ford and Hamlin. And maybe the best thing about the combination of Damar Hamlin and Paris Ford heading into 2020, at least from my perspective, I think maybe the best thing about it is that you're not guessing on those guys. You've seen what they can do, and they're only going to get better. I mean, Damar Hamlin maybe is at his ceiling, but his ceiling is really high. And if he can do in 2020 what he did in 2019 and 2018, that's really good. And Paris Ford, I think, can get better. I mean, I've said this before. I've heard from some people that maybe I criticize Paris Ford, and I think all I've done is point out that there are parts in his game last year where he could have done better. I think there are areas where he could improve. I also think he is maybe the most exciting defensive player Pitt has had since, I don't know. You might pick Darrelle Revis, but Revis didn't make plays in the volume that Paris Ford makes simply because of opportunity. I mean, guys just didn't throw at Darrelle Revis. When they did, exciting things happened for Pitt. They just didn't throw at Revis very often. Paris Ford, playing safety, was able to be in the mix a whole lot more and be in the middle of things a whole lot more. And so he's able to make more plays and be more exciting. I mean, he's one of the most electrifying players I've seen at Pitt in a long time. And that's just one season. He did it for 1 year. He's only going to get better in 2020, in his redshirt junior year. If you're just talking top line talent, safety might be Pitt's strongest position. But when you get into the depth question, where defensive end can go Jones, Alexandra, Weaver, Baldonado, Morgan, all 5 of those guys with a ton of experience last year, safety doesn't quite have that. They've got Ford and Hamlin, which is great. But behind it, you got Eric Hallett and Brandon Hill. Now, Hallett played a decent amount last year. Hallett was on the field a fair amount, usually playing in that Delta nickel defensive package they use on the third downs, third and longs. And so he got playing time. He got experience. He also got a lot of playing time when either Ford or Hamlin got ejected, which unfortunately happened a few times. So Hallett got some experience, but the other guy is going to be Brandon Hill. And he played 4 games, 3 games, something like that. He was able to redshirt. So he got on the field a little bit, almost all on special teams, and ended up taking a redshirt. So he's lacking the experience. He doesn't have experience of, a Baldonado or a Morgan if we're going to compare safety to defensive end. So that's the separation. It's close. It's close because Hamlin and Ford are that good. But the depth at defensive end is just, it's a little bit better. Actually, it's a lot better. The depth at defensive end, the experience in the depth at defensive end is a lot better than it is at safety. So DNs go 1, safeties go 2. Number 3 is controversial. I have to take a drink before I say it. I'm going to see on the YouTube. Do we have, is there any guests? Let's see. Nicholas Temperio made a guess to on the rankings. He said DNs, safety. Well, he said pretty much the same thing I did. The DNs were number 1, safeties are number 2 due to the depth question. And then he put defensive tackles number 3. I'll go through the rest of Nicholas's ranking here because it's actually pretty good. 4 is the guard center, those interior linemen. 5 is the cornerback. 6 is the wide receivers and tight ends. He put them together. You have to keep them separate. You have to keep the receivers and tight ends separate. I kept them separate. So I'm ranking 11 position groups here. Nicholas has quarterback 7, linebackers 8, running backs 9, and the offensive tackles number 10. So he puts them last. Pit Parade guess, his guess is, am I going to put wide receivers at number 3? Now, my number 3 pick, I think, is a controversial pick, but it's not quite that far, Pit Parade. It's not the wide receivers. No, my number 3 pick, the strongest position on the team, is quarterback. I'll let that sit for a second. And then I'll make my case. I picked quarterback almost exclusively on the strength of Kenny Pickett. I like the backup quarterbacks. Nick Patty played last year and got a win over Delaware. Unimpressive as it may have been, he contributed a touchdown to the UCF game. I'm high on Davis Bevel like everybody else. I think Joey Yellen is a really intriguing guy to bring in as a transfer. But this is really about Kenny Pickett. And it's really about having a 3-year starter, a senior quarterback, a guy who threw for 3,000 yards last year, again, on a bajillion passes. But a guy who, and we've talked about the adjusted completion percentage stat that Pro Football Focus has. Well, they take the completion percentage and then they adjust it to account for drops, throwaways, passes batted down at the line of scrimmage, spikes. The things that really maybe shouldn't affect a quarterback's completion percentage. And they adjust for that. And when Pro Football Focus applied that formula, the adjusted completion percentage formula to Kenny Pickett, he ended up in the 70s and ranked, I think, in the top 25 nationally among Power 5 quarterbacks in adjusted completion percentage. Actually, not even Power 5. This is just FBS. So I thought that was interesting because we talked so much last year about those issues that dogged this offense. Dropped passes, procedure penalties, fumbles, and some of those things are on Kenny Pickett. There's no question about it. You can't. Some of those dropped passes weren't perfect throws. They were catchable throws, but they weren't perfect throws. He did not always lead his receivers. He did not always read the defense well. He did not always feel pressure. I'm not going to say that Kenny Pickett is a perfect quarterback, but I'm also going to put him way down the list of issues that dogged this offense and this team last season. And I think you could make a pretty good case that he was one of the best players on offense. Maybe the best player on offense. I don't know who you'd put ahead of him. Jimmy Morrissey, maybe. But nobody else really goes above Kenny Pickett. And I think if you have a 3-year senior starter at quarterback and a guy who I think can lead this offense when guys aren't jumping off sides and tight ends and wide receivers aren't dropping passes. I think he can do a pretty good job leading this offense. I think being in the same offense with the same coordinator 2 years in a row is going to help. I think his receivers will be better than they were a year ago. I think his tight ends will be better than they were a year ago. I think his offensive line is going to be better than it was a year ago. And I think as a result of all of that, he is going to be better than he was a year ago. And so I'm willing to put Kenny Pickett up there. And by extension, the quarterbacks. I'm going to put them up there. And I wrestled with this a little bit. But then I thought, you know what? No. Quarterback should be a strength for this team. And I think quarterback is a strength for this team. Let's see what the YouTube commenters are replying. Josh Newark, boo, on that one. Says the defensive tackles are much, much better than the quarterback. Jalen Twyman by himself is so much better than Kenny Pickett. And Colin Towle replied as well. He has the defensive tackles ahead of the quarterback, and I'll reveal number 4. It is the defensive tackles. I do have the D tackles right after the quarterbacks, but I'm giving Pickett the edge. I mean, I think having a 3-year senior starter is important, and I don't think that's just a matter of there was nobody else, even though to some extent there was nobody else. I think Kenny Pickett is good enough. And I feel like I'm damning with faint praise when I say that, but I'm not. I think he can be, he can throw for 3,000 yards again, and I think he can do it in an even more efficient manner if he gets a little more help around him. And then I think he can earn that ranking. Now, number 4, defensive tackles. This is sort of, closing the book that we opened with the number 1 ranking of the defensive ends. I said, last week I talked about how the defensive line was the strength of the team. If I'm going to put the defensive ends at number 1, defensive tackle can't be far behind. And so I put it behind safety and quarterback because, the defensive tackle, Jalen Twyman is really good. And I'll come back to Twyman in a second because I think there is something to say about him. But you do need more out of that group. I like Devin Danielson. I think Keyshawn Camp coming back is huge. I think, David Green and Tyler Bentley were nice reserves last year. Kalijah Cansey seems to get some positive reviews. He could be a factor as a redshirt freshman this year. But you don't have much in the way of proven commodities. Certainly not the way you do a defensive end. When you look at those tackles, Danielson, Camp has a history of production, but he has to stay healthy. Danielson didn't. I mean, he's played, but he could stand to be a little more productive. Same for Green and Bentley. And the thing with Twyman, Jalen Twyman was an awesome pass rusher last year, but I've made this point a few times. He needs to do more in the run game. And this isn't one of those weird, trying to find criticism where, for the sake of finding criticism. It's not one of those things. I think you look at his stats, he had 10.5 sacks and 12 tackles for loss. If you can get that kind of penetration to get after the quarterback like that, I think you got to make an impact on the run game too. I think you have to, you got to make more plays behind the line of scrimmage, not just as a pass rusher. Now, he's a great pass rushing defensive tackle, but I think he can be more productive overall. When you look at a guy, that comparison that we always want to make of Aaron Donald, when you look at Aaron Donald, he's a guy who's creating havoc in the backfield all the time, not just as a pass rusher. He famously had that play where he tackled 2 guys, in the Duke game in the middle of a handoff. He had 6 tackles for loss or whatever it was in that game at Georgia Tech in 2013. You need to. Jalen Twyman needs to play more like that. He needs to add that element to his game and not just be a great pass rusher, but also be able to make plays against the run. So he could be a little bit better. The rest of the group has to elevate and step up. But I'm pretty bullish on those guys overall. Number 5 for me, as we run down the position ranking, again, 1 defensive end, 2 safety, 3 quarterback, 4 defensive tackle. And number 5, I go with the corners. And this is, it's a little bit like safety, where you've got 2 pretty good guys on the top line. Safety, you have 2 great players on the top line. Cornerback, I think you have 2 pretty good to really good players on the top line. But then the depth, you don't have anything. Marquez Williams has played a little bit, not much in terms of meaningful snaps. Judson Tallender really hasn't played at all at corner. A.J. Woods played in like 10 games last year, and it was all on special teams. He's probably going to be one of your top, 4 corners, I would think, as a sophomore. And then you have freshmen coming in. You really don't have anything in the way of experienced depth. And for as much as we praised Pat Narduzzi's defensive back recruiting, and I think he's done a good job at restocking that position group, particularly compared to what he inherited, right now they're a little bit thin after Damari Mathis and Jason Pinnock, and they need that depth to develop because Mathis and Pinnock are both seniors this year. It's kind of crazy that time has flown by like that, but they are both seniors this year. So you're going to need other guys next year regardless of what happens in 2020, regardless of how well Pinnock and Mathis play or how poorly they play. You're going to need some of those younger guys. No, I shouldn't even say younger because these guys aren't that young anymore. Some of these inexperienced guys are going to have to get experience in 2020 so they can come out ready to play in 2021 when you really need them to step into starting jobs. So, Mathis and Pinnock, they played a lot of football. I think they're both really good corners. You just don't have any depth behind them, and that's a big question mark. For number 6, I'm going to go over to the offense here, and actually, who was it? Nicholas, I think Temperio mentioned this, and check out some of the comments here real quick. Pit Parade said one of the corners had a bad game versus Eastern Michigan. I mean, everybody on the defense had a bad game against Eastern Michigan. That was the worst game the defense played all season. I don't know why that happened. I don't know what caused those guys to play like they did, but they were bad in that bowl game. There's no question about it. So I'm not going to just single out one of the corners because they all stunk. I mean, I don't think Jalen Twyman played a good game. I don't think that defensive line played a good game. They couldn't get any pressure on that quarterback, and he was able to run around a little bit. But I mean, they weren't even forcing him to get out of the pocket all that much. It was just they didn't look very interested in being there until like the final 2 minutes, and then they played great. If they'd done that earlier, the game would have been a blowout, and they would have, But that's neither here nor there. Number 6, I'm going to go back to the offense, and I'm going to pick those interior offensive linemen. The 2 guards in the center. Center, obviously, Jimmy Morrissey. You've got multi-year starter there, 3-year starter, 4-year starter, whatever he's been at this point. I mean, the guy seems like he's been around forever and a day. And been a starter for almost that whole time. And, you saw the impact it made when he got hurt in 2018 and when he was out, how it affected the offense in the season finale against Miami and then the ACC championship game and then the Sun Bowl. And it certainly didn't go very well for Pitt when they lost Jimmy Morrissey. And then I think you saw how much better they were when he came back into the mix last season. And then the guards, Bryce Hargrove, full year starting, I think was a solid left guard last year. Right guard, Jake Cradle, I think started most of the season or the second half of the season at right guard. It'll be him or Gabe Hoy. I think Gabe Hoy could play outside at tackle or he can move inside to guard where he was. I mean, he played a bunch of snaps last year at guard. So, I mean, you get one of those guys, and I think whichever one you end up with, you'll get the benefit of a position battle. You know what I mean? I think they'll compete with each other, they'll push each other, and the result will be better play. And so I think you'll get some strength out of that position. So I think all 3 of those guys together, where you go Hargrove, Morrissey, and then either Cradle or Hoy, I think you end up with really strong interior offensive line that should be pretty stout in there. I think they should do a good job. And I think that's a pretty strong position for Pitt, on a lot of levels, talent and experience, with a lot of the experience for at least at the 2 guard spots coming last season. But I think they've got pretty good combo there. Whoops, flipped the wrong way on my slides. I took away number 6. Number 7, and this is one that I really did wrestle with because I wasn't sure where to put these guys because I have a lot of mixed feelings, and it's the linebackers. And you bring back Phil Campbell and Cam Bright, and I think those would be the 2 starting outside linebackers. Like those guys a lot. I think they're really good players. And I think they both had breakout seasons last year. It was their first extended playing time. I mean, Campbell had been playing safety up until last season when he moved to linebacker. Cam Bright was a package defender. I mean, he came in the Delta package, played on third and longs, that kind of thing, and didn't really see much time in the base defense. Well, last year he moves into a more prominent role in the base defense, rotating, mostly I think at the star linebacker position. And did well. I think they both did well, and now they'll be counted on to be two of the kind of rock guys, the foundation guys of the linebackers in 2020. But I have real questions about the depth behind those guys at outside linebacker, and then there's questions about middle linebacker. Now, I keep saying Chase Pine will probably be the guy to play there, and I think that'll be the case. And he's got experience at middle linebacker. He's made a couple starts there, in place of either Quentin Werginnis or Elias Reynolds or Salim Brightwell or whoever. He's got playing time. He's been in the Delta package. He's seen time in the base defense, but he's never really been able to grab a spot consistently. And while I think that as a redshirt senior, he should be ready to go, and play 13 games or 14, right? He should be able to play a full season as a starting middle linebacker. He should know the defense well enough and be comfortable enough operating it. I mean, the truth is he hasn't done it yet. And so it's kind of an ideal guy to have to step into that spot insofar as an experienced redshirt senior who has played a lot, but he needs to do it. He needs to get out there and play. And until he does, I can't just stand on top of the table and beat the drum for him and say, boy, Chase Pine's going to be awesome, because you don't know. And so I have some real questions about linebacker. I mean, we could get to the end of the season and you could point to the linebackers and put them in the top 5 or top 4, or top 3 or something like that. And I think last year you probably, at the end, if you were doing an end of season ranking, last year you probably would have put the linebackers in the top 5 at the minimum and maybe top 4. I'd have to think about that. I think some of it would look the same. I think DN, safety, probably cornerback would be a little bit higher. Instead of being 5, it might be up at 4 or 3. But I think linebackers will be up in the top 5 and maybe top 4. Based on how Kylan Johnson played, based on how Campbell and Bright played, based on how Salim Brightwell played. But if we're projecting for 2020 and we're trying to answer those questions of who's the middle linebacker, who are the outside linebackers, well, not who are the outside linebackers, but who's the depth at outside linebacker, it's hard for me to put them higher than 7 just for right now. Number 8, and we're getting down to a point now where, I mean, you're in the bottom half here, and I think there's some potential in these groups. I'm really bullish on this group I have at number 8, and I actually could have put them ahead of the linebackers because I might be more bullish on this group than I am on the linebackers. And if you've listened to me before, you probably know who it is that I'm thinking of, and that's the wide receivers. I think this group has the potential to be really good. Much better than last year, maybe much better than the year before. Yeah, actually definitely much better than the year before, and probably much better than 2017. You start off with the experienced guys with a Taysier Mack and a Shockey Jacques-Louis, two guys who I think are still looking to put together a consistent full season of production, but have shown a lot of flashes over the course of, certainly last season and then with Taysier Mack 2 years ago. Shockey Jacques-Louis showed flashes, I think, late in the season. He needs to stay healthy. Mack, too, just to a certain extent, because he's dealt with injuries as well. And then you add in Jared Wayne, who played as a freshman last season and was the second leading receiver over the final 4 games of the season, I believe, behind only Maurice French, who caught like 74 passes in the bowl game. So you start with those 3 of Mack, Jacques-Louis, and Wayne. And you throw in Jordan Addison, the freshman, who enrolled early. You throw in Jalen Barden, another freshman, who did not enroll early, but he'll be here over the summer. I think both of those guys are going to see the field this year as freshmen. And then you add in Trey Tipton coming back for another season. You add in Michael Smith and Dontavius Butler-Jenkins coming back, as returning upperclassmen. Not a ton of experience or production for those guys. They have some talent. They could potentially get on the field. And then you add in, Aiden Henningham, another freshman who enrolled early. I think there's a lot of potential and talent in that group. If those guys can hold on to the ball, they've got guys who can make plays downfield, and Taysier Mack, potentially Trey Tipton. And then they've got a lot of guys, they've got some guys who can catch the ball and make plays after the catch. Shockey Jacques-Louis, Jordan Addison, Jalen Barden. And I think Jared Wayne functions as a possession receiver, middle distance type of receiver, but a good one at accomplishing that. I think he can fill that role really well. I'm bullish on this group. I put them at 8 because, they were just not good last year. Just for the bulk of the season, they were just not very good. And so I put them down at number 8, but I'm really bullish on the potential this group has and where I think they can get in 2020. We got a few spots left. Let's check in on the YouTube comments and see who see what people have been saying in the comment sections here. Colton Janoski says cornerback and interior offensive line are 5A and 5B in my opinion. I put the corners slightly ahead. I think Pinnock and Mathis are a little bit better than in their careers. Better than what the interior offensive linemen have been. Eric Rogers says, I think Keyshawn Camp and Jalen Twyman could be superstars. Definitely put them ahead of Kenny Pickett, and kicker ahead of the interior offensive lineman. Look, I'll be honest. I'm just doing offense and defense here, Eric. And I thought about that after I started putting this list together. I said, should I get the specialists in here, Kessman and, Krista Dulu, and it's just it's tricky. I just don't know how. I just don't know how I would rank them in. I feel like it would have to be like with caveats, and I just leaving it out. As far as, Eric also said, he thinks Camp and Twyman could be superstars, definitely ahead of the quarterback. I think Keyshawn Camp and Jalen Twyman are really good. I think they can be very good players. But again, Keyshawn Camp needs to be healthy and stay healthy for a full season. And Twyman, as good as he is, he's one guy in a position that has 2 on the field at all times and relies on 4 or 5 because they have a rotation. And we're talking about the strength of a position group here. I can't take one defensive tackle and say, well, that guy is better than the quarterback and put the whole position group above the quarterbacks. It can't work that way when we're trying to rank the strength of each position group. You follow what I'm saying on that? So it's tricky because, if we were just going to rank players, if we were ranking the best players on the team, yes, Jalen Twyman would be ranked ahead of Kenny Pickett. But we're not. We're ranking position groups, and that's what makes it a little bit tricky. Colin Towell asks, at the end of the year, what position do you think can make the biggest jump? I think it's wide receiver or tight end is what Colin says. I think the wide receivers can make a jump. We have 3 spots left, and I haven't mentioned the tight ends yet, so they're in the bottom 3. I think they absolutely can go up from where they are. And I think the linebackers can jump from 7 up into the top 5, like I said. I think there are a few groups that can jump. Somebody's always got to be number 11. Somebody always has to be 10 and 9. You're always going to have those guys at the bottom. But, a few of those spots I think for sure can jump up there. Josh Newark says it's interesting how much speculation exists on what we think will happen on the offensive side of the ball versus what has been proven on the defensive side. And that's a good point, Josh. With the offense, when I talk about the offensive line, right, I talk about, those guys should be better because they've all played a lot. When we talk about the receivers, the running backs, inevitably we end up talking about freshmen a lot, Jordan Addison and Jalen Barden and Nizzy Abanaconda. We talk about, Jared Wayne over the last 4 games, he needs to do it for a full season. Yeah, it's all speculation, whereas Ford and Hamlin and Weaver and Jones and Alexandra and Pinnock and Matt, the defensive guys are proven, and the offensive guys have something to prove. That's good. Somebody send that to Pat Narduzzi. Pit Parade mentioned Will Gibson. That's a guy I didn't even bring his name up when I talked about the wide receivers. He missed all of last season with a knee injury. Freshman out of Aliquippa. He's a redshirt freshman this year. Really talented guy. Good size. He's fast. He's good hands. He could be in the mix as well. I really like the depth. I like the talent and how it's spread out in this wide receiver room. I really do. All right, let's go to number 9 on the rankings. Like I said, just to for those listening to the podcast who aren't watching on the YouTube live stream, you can't see the list on the screen. We've got number 1, defensive ends, number 2, safeties, number 3, quarterbacks, number 4, defensive tackles, number 5, cornerbacks, number 6, interior offensive linemen, the guards in the center, number 7, linebackers, number 8, wide receivers, and number 9 is the tight ends. And I put the tight ends here I put the tight ends here entirely on the speculation and the expectation that Lucas Kroll is going to be good. And the guy looks the part. He's big. He seems like he can catch. He can run well. Can he be healthy? Is he going to get hurt or anything like that? You have to wonder about that. But I mean, that's it. That it's all about whether Lucas Kroll can be good. Maybe Kai Wright is ready to contribute, or Daniel Morega, the junior college guy that brought it. I don't know. You can run some other names out there. You can put some other guys on the field. It doesn't matter. Lucas Kroll is going to determine whether the tight ends are a strength of the offense or the worst part of it again for the second year in a row, because they were the worst part of the offense last year. No matter what you want to say about the running game, no matter what you want to say about the offensive line or Kenny Pickett or the receivers, the tight ends were the dogs, in the bad way, the dogs of the offense last year. And that's not personal with those guys. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but they were. And they held back the offense. And the expectation is Lucas Kroll is going to make that offense better. He looks like he should be able to do that. And so I put them at number 9. Could probably be interchangeable with number 10. And number 10 is the running backs. And obviously, if number 10 is the running backs, you can do the math on this. You know that number 11, I'll just put it on the screen, is the offensive tackles. And so, okay, I'm probably dogging the offensive tackles a little too much here. They probably don't need to be number 11. Somebody has to be number 11. I don't know. Would you put the running backs there? Based on last year's performance, I would put the tight ends there. I'm banking on Lucas Kroll being better. Or improving that tight end position in 2020. The running backs, there's just a feeling that you've seen what you're going to get out of A.J. Davis. There's a feeling that Vincent Davis is not going to be able to be an every down back. Nobody knows what Todd Sibley's going to be. Daniel Carter moved to fullback. Izzy Abonaconda, exciting freshman, but he's a freshman. Enrolled early, only got to practice for 3 practices. I don't know. There's uncertainty. Is there more uncertainty at running back than there is at tight end? No, not necessarily. There might be more uncertainty at tight end, actually, because at least we know we've seen A.J. Davis and Todd Sibley and Vincent Davis in action. We've seen those guys on the field. So really, there's less uncertainty. It's just that the certainty we have about those guys is that they each have their own ceilings, and they're kind of limited. Again, I'm ranking the tight ends at number 9, basic entirely on Lucas Kroll. So if he goes out and stinks, that ranking drops really fast. The offensive tackles probably don't deserve to be number 11. I think I put them there because it's such a crucial position. And it's been, if not a weakness, it's been a vulnerability for a few years now. Dating back to 2016? 17, I guess you still had Brian O'Neill in 17. But it hasn't been a strength of the defense or strength of the offense like it needs to be. In the last 2 years, and it needs to be better. And now some of those guys have gotten some experience. Carter Warren started every game last year. Carson Van Lin played a bunch. They better be ready. I don't even know who the other starter is going to be. Maybe they bring in a grad transfer. They're trying to get this guy or that guy. Maybe they bring in a graduate transfer to line up at the other, starting tackle spot. Maybe Gabe Hoy slides from guard back out to tackle. Maybe Carson Van Lin is ready to go. Maybe Liam Dick or Matt Gonsalves. I don't know who it's going to be. And that uncertainty is another big problem. They weren't very good last year, and we don't even know who's going to step out there to play this year. Do they need to be 11? Probably not. You could probably flip-flop those last three in any order you want. Tight ends, running backs, offensive tackles. It could be any combination thereof. I'm looking at the, whatchamacallit, the YouTube comments, and let's see. Josh Newark says the offensive tackles were turnstiles. They're the worst. Pit Parade says tight end should be number 11. And I'm looking here. Yeah, and Pit Parade says there's no guarantee that Lucas Kroll will do that well. No, there's not. There's no guarantee about it at all. That's just based on my speculation and expectation. He looks the part. He looks like a guy who can run. He's got good size. He seems to be able to catch the ball. Those three things, you put them together, you should be effective in this offense. This offense is going to have opportunities for the tight end. You don't have to be, Gronk or, Darren Waller or one of these guys. If you can just catch the ball, you're going to get a lot of passes thrown your way, and you're going to have opportunities to make plays. And Lucas Kroll looks like he could fill that role. So there's my ranking. Number 1, defensive end. 2, safety. 3, quarterback. 4, defensive tackle. 5, cornerback. 6, offensive guard, center, the interior lineman there. 7, the linebackers. 8, the wide receivers. 9, the tight ends. 10, the running backs. And 11, the offensive tackles. That's my position ranking for heading into this season. Whether it looks that way at the end of the season remains to be seen, but that's what I think. I think that, you probably trying to get the screen sort of reset there for the YouTube viewers. I think you probably will expect to see the defensive ends stay at the top of the list, safeties stay at the top of the list, and so on and so forth. But there's some movement in there. I think linebackers could move. I think wide receivers can move. I think tight ends can move up. I think offensive tackle needs to move up. Somebody's ultimately going to have to be 11. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad. In this case, expectations are low for the offensive tackles. But somebody's going to have to end up being at that bottom spot. Let's see here. So what else do we want to talk about here? We got a little bit of time left on the live stream. We like to try and go for about an hour or so. I wanted to talk. ESPN has their FPI, football percentage index, football power index. It's some sort of rating system that ESPN does. You've probably seen it. Let me see if I can bring it up here to take a look at it. And where it's interesting in the preseason is it compares, your team, the team you're looking at, it compares one team against another. So each team has its FPI, football power index, whatever they call it, whatever it stands for. And I should know that just to be a little more informed. But then it compares it to the opponents on your schedule. You can compare against other teams and get sort of a percentage chance of victory or loss. So, Pitt against Richmond is a 96.8%, win likelihood, Miami of Ohio, it's 78.6. Syracuse, 74.4. Those are ones that you would probably expect to see. But when you look at the schedule as a whole, according to ESPN and the FPI, not the FBI, they've got Pitt going 6-6. Wins against Miami, Marshall, Richmond, and Duke. So a 4-0 start, that's good. And then losing to Miami and Notre Dame. Beating Georgia Tech. And then losing 4 in a row. Florida State, Virginia Tech, North Carolina, Virginia. And then beating Syracuse. And they're not projecting a win or a loss. They're projecting it's the percentage chances, right? 78.6% chance of beating Miami of Ohio. 53.7% chance of beating Marshall. Now, I think one of the things there, Marshall has a lot of players back, and the game is on the road, and probably that home-road distinction is an important one that factors in there. Duke, 60% chance at home. Okay. Georgia Tech at Heinz Field, 55.7%. favoring Pitt. At Virginia, 49.9%. So that's almost a coin toss right there. But I'm a little surprised it is because of what Virginia lost and what Pitt has coming back. And then, at Florida State was the worst numbers for Pitt, 19.2% chance of winning. Against Notre Dame, 24.7% chance of winning, and so on and so forth. Virginia Tech and North Carolina both sub 30% on the likelihood of winning. At Miami, sub 40%. I think that's just about all the games. And kind of like we talked before about the win-loss totals, the over-under totals on wins. We talked about that when Vegas was coming out with 6.5, the number 6.5, and with the under being favored, the under paying less. And I think, you just have to look at last season and look at where Pitt was last season and how bad the offense was to understand where some of these expectations come from. We all look at the team and we see a very good defense, a really good defense, a borderline and maybe over the border, great defense. We see an offense with a 3-year starting senior. We see, some talented playmakers. We see an offensive line that has experience. And even if we don't think they're going to become, the 2016 Pitt offense in terms of scoring, they're not going to average 35, 38, 40 points per game. It's totally reasonable to expect just a little bit of improvement out of Pitt's offense in 2020. And if there's just a little bit of improvement, this team should win a bunch more games because they were only a little bit away from winning 10 or 11 last year. They really were. Just a little bit better offense against Miami, just a little bit better offense against Boston College. Heck, you could throw into the Virginia game. Just don't be so bad on offense, and you had a chance of winning that game. But you can easily talk yourself into 10 wins for this team last year, just with a little bit of improvement on offense. And it wouldn't have taken much for the offense to push Pitt to 9-10 wins. And so I think we look at it this year and we say, why can't they get just a little bit better in 2020 and win some of those games? Some of those games that might have come down to toss-ups where your defense was keeping you in the game the whole time and your offense just had to do something. Well, maybe this year they just do something. Again, not light the world on fire. Just do something. But those of us around the team, or those of us who watch the team, follow the team closely, I didn't mean to make it sound like an insider's type of thing, around the team. Those of us who just follow this team and watch this team closely seem to be the only ones who are seeing that. What are you going to do? I think that probably tends to happen, that, fans or media or people who cover a team, follow a team, close to the team, watch the team closely, pay attention and observe, tend to have different thoughts on the team than people maybe from the outside. And I've seen some, David Hale is a guy who writes for ESPN.com and does a lot of ACC coverage, and he's somewhat bullish on Pitt, I think, for this year because he thinks the potential is there for just a little bit of offensive improvement, which could make a big difference in the win-loss column. But there's not a lot of that going around. So, I don't know. I think it's just, it's really one of these things where you have to show that your offense isn't going to be garbage, before anybody believes that your offense is not going to be garbage. That's some deep stuff right there, right? Anyway. Well, it was fun ranking the positions. If you had some thoughts on that, share them with me. If you have rankings, you can share them on Twitter at Panther-Lair, or you could go to the website. This is probably the ideal one, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. We're going to actually take a poll about this, do sort of a kind of an Associated Press, everybody ranks, and then you assign points and, first place votes and all that kind of stuff. And we'll see who, how the positions rank out according to the fans. I would like to hear what the fans have to say. So go to Panther-Lair.com. You should be there all the time anyway. If you're a Pitt fan, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It is the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, we have message boards, and that's where we'll be talking about this stuff. We'll be talking about this podcast. We'll be talking about ranking the position groups. We'll be talking about what's the strongest position on the team, what's the weakest, and so on and so forth. And we'll be having those conversations there. We actually had a really cool thing this week still going on the basketball board. the premium center court at the Pete basketball message board, where people drafted fantasy Pitt basketball teams, and then we seeded them, put them into a bracket, and we've got them matched up, and people are voting on the matchups. And it's kind of fun because we ended up with like 20 teams, and they each drafted 6 players. So if you could think of 120 Pitt players, yeah, some of the draft picks are pretty funny. Jarrell Revis is on one of the teams, actually. And so is Trey Ziegler. Chase Adams got drafted onto one of the teams. So it's kind of funny to see some of these matchups, but it's fun. I mean, what else are you doing with your time right now? You might as well go to Panther-Lair.com and talk about Pitt sports, because seriously, what else do you have to do? So check it out, Panther-Lair.com. And while you're there, open one of these. Tranquil Breezes from Voodoo Brewery out of Meadville. Good spot, Meadville. It is what it is, but the beer is good. Tranquil Breezes is good when it's a West Coast American Pale Ale. And we like the Pale Ales here on the Panther-Lair podcast. So grab a beer, check out the website. Thanks again for tuning into the live stream. We do this every Tuesday night at 8:30, and then release the podcast on Wednesday morning. So we appreciate you checking in on the live stream. Everybody who's in the comments, we appreciate that as always. It's like having a little conversation here on a Tuesday night. And, if you weren't able to make the live stream, you just check out the podcast on Wednesday morning. We appreciate that as well. So thanks for tuning in. Remember, Friday morning, we've got another great podcast coming to you. It's a conversation with a former Pitt star, someone I think you'll enjoy hearing from. It was a conversation I enjoyed having, and I think you'll enjoy listening to it as well. So make sure you check that out. And then Saturday mornings, the Panthers Insider Show, 93.7 The Fan at 8 a.m. So lots of Pitt content for you. Stay tuned to the website, Panther-Lair.com. Thanks again for being on the live stream. Thanks again for listening to the podcast. Make sure you check out what we have coming up later on this week. Stay safe, stay inside, wear a mask, do all the things that they tell you to do. Maybe we can all go watch some football games in the fall. So thanks again for participating and checking it out. We really appreciate it. Have a safe and healthy rest of the week. And we will talk to you again in a few days.